Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Nick Bandy, CMO at LiveVox, and joining me are Michael DeSalles, Principal Analyst at Frost & Sullivan, and Boris Grinchpan, General Manager of CRM and Messaging at LiveVox. Gentlemen, thanks for joining today.
Thank you.
So, our subject is delivering unmatched CX through seamless customer journeys and practical AI. It's a certainly very relevant topic. So let's dive right in. Michael, I know Frost & Sullivan has done a lot of research in these areas, so please share with us some of the findings that you have.
Well, great. Thanks, Nick, so much. I'm delighted to be a part of this webinar, and I want to thank you and Boris, and of course the folks at LiveVox for the invitation to share these research findings, as well as commentary from interviews we have with contact center leaders. So as we bring up the first graphic, I wanted to highlight what we're seeing as the main challenges and issues that are having a huge impact on operationalizing a contact center. And actually, I prefer the term interaction center, or even better, relationship hub, that was coined by Bruce Temkin, a customer experience transformist. I wish I had thought of that myself. But I wanted to point out just a few here. So apart from the already difficult task of recruiting, testing, and hiring new representatives, it's the contact center's struggle to train and, more importantly, retain agents that they already have. My comment is that agent attrition, which can range from 50 to 80% in a contact center, is what I consider the absolute scourge of the industry and one of the biggest problems. Agents even today have too many screens and systems to access to address even the simplest inquiries. It might be billing, account balances, and changes, maybe even package delivery status. Well, it slows everybody down and adds to my frustration as a customer. Although I think it's gotten better over the years, we all continue to have to repeat our basic information either online or with a live agent, and then tolerate long hold times. And then finally, it's really hard to keep track of all the moving parts in running a call center. If you look at digitizing it, innovating, and staying current with new tools, new platforms, and systems that are in front of, alongside, and behind the agent. Next slide, please. So here's some of our data. And from an empirical standpoint, the next graphic shows the results of our survey of over 3,000 customer experience executives that we conducted earlier this year, and asked this question: which key digital transformation objectives have been accelerated as a result of COVID-19, right? And as you can see from the top three, and the ranking percentiles are actually pretty close here, they include adapting to new work modes, which I think we're seeing, and that could mean remote working, staggered or modified shifts, this new hybrid work environment, moving towards greater digital customer engagement on the self-serve front end, and I think we've all experienced that, and of course, enhancing e-commerce capability. I think it's important to note that very close behind all of these rankings are, one, improving client engagement and customer experience, along with increasing capacity to respond to higher customer demand, which we might see with our economic recovery just on the front end of things. Next slide, please. So we might ask, how does all of this play in the context of disruptive new technologies, new business models in multiple verticals and geographies? Well, this next graphic shows how we at Frost & Sullivan conceptualize this radical change happening in our world. I think we can reasonably conclude that everything from new business models to disruptive technologies are having impacts across all industries and across all geographies. And if we can imagine each ring in this circle kind of turning and brushing against one another, above it and below it, sort of like tectonic plates, this kind of world spinning with changing dynamics. The process of technology and all the data that comes with it or being produced in our world is extremely disruptive. And part of what I find so fascinating about this is we're living in a world of immersive technologies and, of course, then customer experiences. And that means to me that within the next 3 years or so, the exponential growth of phenomena such as digitization, machine learning, that will fundamentally change how businesses create value, how we satisfy customers, and outperform competitors. But two things jump out at me here. First, companies have to take actions that really position them for the next level of success. Understanding which digital technologies are required today and which ones will be important tomorrow is critical to make effective plans, to prioritize budgets, to sequence investments, and schedule implementations in order to maximize revenues. Companies that don't embrace digital will probably experience what we call a Kodak moment. And then second, I'd like to suggest that the goal here is to develop an agile and digitally transformed enterprise that's capable of acting and reacting to all of the perpetually changing world events, this massive data lake that we all deal with, and consumers with a whole different set of values, beliefs, attitudes, and maybe even lifestyles. Next slide, please.
So let me jump in here for a second on that, Mike.
Please do.
That's a terrific slide. There's a lot of moving parts in there. So Boris, quick question: when you see the slide, you think about obviously a lot of new channels, digitization, and data. How do you think about how all that comes together from a product perspective? What comes to mind for you in that?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, Nick. I think what we've seen sort of over the course of the last number of years is sort of this explosion of ways that consumers are looking to communicate. And what we've seen over that course of time is we've seen many organizations sort of add on these additional communication methods to get to a place where they're communicating with the consumer and essentially servicing the consumer in that specific channel. And that may be sort of like the first foray. But I think what's been very challenging for a lot of clients, a lot of enterprises today, is to be able to tie all of that communication in a cohesive manner and to be able to understand the full communication journey that occurs between the enterprise and the customers. What we've seen over the course of that time is that enterprises have run to meet the demand, but it hasn't been really thought through strategically, and therefore we've seen a huge proliferation of silos, just to service a particular channel or just to service a particular business unit.
Great, thanks, Boris. Let me comment on this next graphic. So as we look at this whole host of industries that are affected, here are some examples of how customer expectations might be changing for certain industries. For retail, for example, it's all about creating this highly personalized customer experience across all those channels that Nick mentioned and devices. It can be in clothing, electronics, even buying tires, which I experienced recently. You'd be quite surprised by how personal it is. If you look at banking and finance and consider maybe on the business as well as the consumer side, mortgage lending, credit cards, student loans, wealth management, it's driving a seamless experience across each one of those very discrete activities. And then healthcare, which is so topical today. We see that providers, payers, and patients expect integrated, intelligent patient care systems. They want telehealth options and healthcare data management to support what I call a fluid data movement, very flexible access, interoperability, and a swift scale-up of innovative applications that are there to support patient interactions. Next slide, please. So here we are with Frost & Sullivan's definition of omnichannel, which frankly we coined back in 2013, 8 years ago, and it hasn't altered very much, hasn't moved. The first half is pretty well known. Omnichannel ensuring ensuring a consistent and seamless high-quality customer experience. But the last sentence, to me, really puts the emphasis on the why. Why is it so important? And that is that it ensures that data and context from initial contact carries over to subsequent channels. thereby reducing customer effort, improving the customer interaction, and then enabling the business to tailor the customer journey. Now, I'll say just one last thing on this. When it comes to discussions and thought leadership, rumors about the term omnichannel going away and dying, maybe in favor of some other definition, are greatly exaggerated. What I want to reinforce here is the importance of delivering a consistent omnichannel experience, which enables contact centers, those relationship hubs I referred to earlier, to improve every single area of their operational strategy.
So how's that definition evolved? That's interesting.
I have something on that. Thank you. So Nick, while we've not changed the definition, we have added to it to include artificial intelligence, AI-enhanced tools, knowledge management, and the impact on interaction outcomes in generating the important insights that actually improve efficiencies, agent engagement, which we all know is very important in order to close the loop on comprehensive customer satisfaction. So forgive me for reading, but here's what it sounds like. Omnichannel enhances the bridge between the customer and the agent experience, incorporating AI-enhanced tools and knowledge management to further improve the outcomes for both. And the resulting data generates deep insights that assist in continuously improving those operational efficiencies, the agent engagement, and ultimately customer satisfaction. Next slide, please. So what does an omnichannel customer strategy really aim to do? Well, one is improve the agent experience, hence the customer experience. It does help you get to that higher level of personalization because at the end of the day, in the customer's mind, they're asking, how well do you know me? And it moves you closer to that sometimes aspirational and hard to achieve goal of consistent, seamless customer experience. Now, I mentioned AI, but it further enables AI and automation by driving simplification and provides a competitive advantage, giving the pace of change in the world of customer contact. Next slide, please.
So
yes.
The last point where we focus on AI, clearly that has an impact, and you've said that you've reorchestrated your definition of omnichannel based on it. So let's spend some time now. I think it's a topic everybody's kind of really interested in, right? Artificial intelligence, what to do with it in the contact center, how to get started. So let's shift the conversation there. And I see on our next slide, we're going to define a couple of things within AI to make sure we're all talking from the same page. So Michael, please share with us that, and then we'll transition the conversation there.
Thanks so much for that, Nick. Because I wanted to take a minute just to level set and share our definition of artificial intelligence, as we use the term, and then make maybe a little bit of a distinction between the use of bots and intelligent virtual agents. So very simply, artificial intelligence for us, seeks to emulate human cognitive capabilities and, importantly, assist in decision-making with high accuracy and speed, using data-driven intelligence and self-learning abilities. Now, bots, again, I kind of take responsibility as an analyst in the industry for the confusion between bots and virtual assistants, but let me say this. Bots are computer programs, and they're really built to engage with an individual and with their artificial intelligence, then emulate humans through either web chat or speech interfaces. And they can be basic apps that can answer simple inquiries, or they can seek to entertain to fully conversational bots, the advanced ones, with intelligence that's embedded into the app and the ability to be integrated into back-end systems. Then finally, we've got intelligent virtual agents. So these are speech or web-enabled applications, and they're backed by sophisticated AI technologies, emulating humans in a customer service environment. For example, like agents in contact centers. And they can be speech or text-driven or a mixture of both. I think we've all experienced that. And in our opinion, intelligent virtual agents and bots differ in terms of their scope, their complexity and capabilities, with virtual agents being more sophisticated, in my opinion. Next slide, please. So you might ask, what are some of the top reasons that companies are investing in artificial intelligence? Our survey data shows in very close percentage ratios, one, to improve the quality of products and services, two, to keep up with and get ahead of competitors, and here's a very important reason, automate customer contact functions by reducing those easy transactional call volumes to agents, improving efficiencies, and finally lowering cost.
Okay.
Slide, please. So this last look at our survey data shows that there are a number of benefits to be derived from using AI. And there are a whole host of reasons, but the most important ones for contact centers are guided assistance for agents and back office workers, and at the heart of it, enhanced customer experience. So listed here in this graphic are just some of the many benefits that can be derived when automating customer interactions using bots and virtual agents. And that would include the data, the analytics, and the AI behind it, with, again, the goal to improve the customer experience. So here's some of the benefits. 24/7, always on. Quick, automated responses. This frees up agent time for more complex tasks. It creates those personalized experiences I mentioned earlier, and then enhances self-service and refines the customer journey. But let me also mention just a few of the benefits for agents. If I'm an agent, it gives me the power to help my customer better. It makes me feel more secure and confident that I know who they are when they contact me. Agents need assistance with research, so it can be a research assistant. Very important, especially in financial services and healthcare, it keeps me in compliance. It helps me be reminded of certain tasks that have to be done. And then finally, as an agent, it assists me with call wrap-up so I can get on to my next customer. So here I like to recap. To close out, let me just talk a little bit about the how and why when we consider the advantages of virtual agents. We're using natural language processing algorithms to understand verbal nuances, and I think that the technology does a great job of that today because it engages in human-like manner, making it even more difficult customer transactions, which can be language-based, they can be regionally based, more personalized, and more conversational. And then finally, there's built-in machine learning. That virtual agent actually gets smarter with every interaction. And it's very easy to iterate on without engaging IT. Virtual agents, and this is for customer satisfaction, offer very fast routing. Well, Nick, that concludes my portion of the presentation. Let me turn it back to you.
Yeah, so really good stuff, Michael. Thank you. So, Boris, let's turn this over to more of a perspective of product management and what you're seeing day to day with end use customers, and focusing again on this whole notion of practical AI.
Absolutely.
But beforehand, why don't you give us a quick 30-second overview of LiveVox?
Yeah, absolutely. For folks who may not be familiar with the organization, LiveVox is a leading contact center as a service software provider. Today, we help our clients communicate with consumers and process over 14 billion interactions. We, of course, have a number of leading contact centers in the enterprise space utilizing the platform. And the platform is really a full suite approach to offering all of the right tools and components for your contact center to be modern and optimize every consumer interaction across channels, CRM conversations, as well as a full workforce optimization suite. So that's a little bit about us, Nick.
Thanks.
Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the lens. So we hear a lot from customers today who are really looking to dive into the notion of utilizing AI and really oftentimes may not know exactly where to start. More specifically, there's sort of a bevy of things they're looking to automate. There are bevy things that require that additional assistance. And so we always get the common question of, well, where do I get started? What should be the first things that I look at? And we like to boil it down for a lot of clients in terms of first looking at the overall customer experience. In other words, what are your customers looking to do? What are they looking to achieve? What does a successful transaction look like for them? That's sort of number one, is identifying the I'll call it the customer or the end consumer use cases that you're looking to automate. The second sort of lens is the technical feasibility of executing such events. Now, I like to always make this practical. What do I mean by that? Well, if you ask the customer today, hey, what would you like to do? The customer would raise their hand and say, I'd like everything to be automated. I want everything in an easy to manage manner. But the reality of it is that some things are not feasible technically, even for your organization. I can give you an example of that. Everybody would love to say, hey, can I please refinance my house since interest rates are very, very low. But the actual technical feasibility of executing that is sort of very, very low. On the reverse side, when you look at the technical feasibility of a common interaction like resetting your password, you of course can execute that. There are certain events and APIs that you can call, so the probability and the success factor is sort of very, very high. The third capability is the propensity to complete the interaction. So commonly when we have conversations with folks on the enterprise side, they would like the customer to do X, but the customer doesn't actually want to do that, whether that's a channel constraint or whether that's sort of the feasibility of doing something. It just doesn't sync. So you may have a customer that maybe wants to obtain a new loan, but the possibility or the probability that they would go through, let's say, a 20 to 30-minute journey with a virtual agent and have a back and forth conversation is sort of not probable. And so this is where we talk about that third leg of the stool, which is what is the probability of completion of sort of these events. So when you put these three events together, they sort of should form a lens for you of, is this an event or is this a component that I can use a virtual agent in order to automate?
So basically the element of self-service.
Yeah, exactly. And so look, before we sort of even go one level deeper in it, let's not forget why we're doing all of these things. I know Michael talked a lot about this, but I just want to sort of hammer home the benefit of this. And it all starts with self-service. We have taught, or the likes of large tech companies have taught the consumer today that it all starts with self-service. It all starts with you Googling or searching something on the web. With the proliferation of voice devices now in your home, a lot of folks have been taught to just say, hey, why don't you just tell me what it is that you'd like help with? So it all starts with really sort of that notion of self-service. And for high volume contact centers today, this helps them essentially provide that self-service capability, especially in events when there's high call volumes. So if you're sitting here today and thinking about, well, where is this going to help me? Well, it's going to help your contact center not only deliver on the self-service promise, but it's going to help you deliver on that self-service promise especially when you have high call volumes and there's this sort of threat that the customer is going to be on hold. So that's one of the ways that this helps your contact center today. It of course reduces your abandonment rates, and it gives customers what they want, which is that 24/7 self-service capability. But I think the last one is very, very important. Michael mentioned this a little bit earlier on in the conversation. He mentioned a very interesting metric regarding the attrition that a lot of contact centers exhibit today. And this is commonly overlooked from a benefit of a virtual agent assist model. And this is the capability in order to lighten the load of your contact center agents from doing very simple repetitive tasks. Those tasks have commonly caused high levels of attrition within our workforce and have really sort of driven down that display, or have really driven down the pleasure, increased the displeasure of the job. So these are sort of the ways that you can think about and the immediate benefits that this will provide, or these solutions provide, to your contact center today. So as you look at things, I think it's always very practical to give folks a little bit of a view in terms of what are some of your easy wins. And so we kind of broke these down. I'll kind of call it the good list versus the not so good list. The good list is in the blue for folks, for color coordination standpoint. So what are good things? Okay, executing on a payment transaction, very structured, very high probability that a customer is going to finish, very short in its nature and very confined, is a good sort of, if you will, reason to deploy self-service. Checking on an item and its status, or activating a certain transaction or a card, or rescheduling an appointment, all of those things are really great things to automate. Now, what are things not so great at automating? Whenever there is nuanced conversations to be had, whenever there's a lot of choices, whenever there's a visual element that needs to be added to the interaction, these conversations aren't ideal. And so we get a lot of questions from customers that say, well, customers call in quite often to make a complaint regarding a certain product. Let's automate that. I would stay away from those types of automation requests, because you're not likely to have success. You're not likely to achieve your goal of delivering great customer experience, and there's likely to be a lot of ambiguity, and there's going to be a lot of customer frustrations. Customers want to be heard, they want to receive that empathy, and no matter how good your virtual agent is, we know one thing: they're not very empathetic. So I would focus on the blue, keep this small, keep this in a box, and these are probably your best and easiest wins. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think, throughout this conversation, we talked a lot about the interactions, we talked a lot about what can make them successful, and I don't think this is really all that debatable. But the question becomes, from an industry standpoint, well, why is this so hard to execute? And the number one reason that we see that the execution of this is very hard, or people have sort of this, that trough of, if you will, disillusionment, if you will, is that the problem is that largely people will look to implement a virtual agent capability, either one, in a specific channel, or only over an incomplete data set. So let me talk to you a little bit about that. So first, let's talk about the incomplete data set. We know we have multiple conversations today with our brands, or the brands that we love, and they have these little bits and pieces of data located in many disparate systems. And so when you start to have a conversation with a virtual agent, the moment that conversation can't be personalized, the moment that they get something wrong, the entire trust factor breaks down completely. So when we start to have conversations with clients today, one of the first things that we talk to them about is, well, where's the data source going to be? Where's that data source that we're going to tap? And more often than not, we realize that our clients are having to aggregate and centralize this data in order to have a successful deployment of the virtual agent or bot. And the lack thereof leads to really an unsuccessful deployment of these tools. The second thing is that people tend to think about virtual agents or bots channel specific, and I think sometimes that may be right, but at times it may be wrong. Here's where it may be wrong. We know that a lot of conversations today start through the utilization of digital channels. A lot of people are, have a mobile device, they're looking to get self-service. The conversation may start via web chat. It may then sort of transition to a voice channel if it needs to be escalated. Unless there's sort of some contextual awareness between that switch happening and that agent knowing what has happened in the past, this is when things sort of tend to fall apart. And this also starts to balloon for an organization the number of virtual agents and bots that they have to deploy, because deploying a different one for every channel with a different data set can quickly become a mess. So I guess what is my point here? My point being here is that the more you can centralize or have a central repository for data, the more successful you're going to be in deploying these tools.
Hey, Boris, we got an interesting question that just came in.
Yeah.
That's obviously related, and they asked, as NLP gets better, does that ultimately help improve the overall accuracy and capabilities of your IVA?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's actually a really good question. As NLP does get better, I think you have the higher probability of having an understanding of an intent that a customer has whenever they're contacting your organization. So in that particular sense, you're less likely to put somebody down a particular incorrect path. So certainly that's the case. However, today, when we look at the challenge of today, we actually look at the challenge much more from a back-end process standpoint. Today, NLP is actually pretty darn good. There are many different ways that you can get analytics and data. The training tools that are out there are amazing, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about that in a moment here. But I think the largest challenge for organizations getting here today is how can I make this bot not just have a routing conversation with my customer, but actually tap into a consistent data set so that the conversation is personal, and that I can execute certain functions that my backend systems are ready for all of that.
So I'm hearing a consistent theme here. Having that ability to have a unified data set and customer data is really going to be key to the success of this, and the ability to scale it. Okay, great. Let's keep moving.
Yeah, absolutely. So why is this important? This is actually pretty important, and I think, Nick, you kind of took me down this path in terms of, well, what happens when you actually get to the point of deploying a virtual agent or a bot? Well, I think your journey doesn't exactly stop there. And I think a lot of people kind of forget about this. Your initial deployment may go well, it may go very so-so, but those should be your expectation, because one of the things that you're going to do very quickly afterwards, A, to just check your work, but B, to make sure that you're going to have success, is you're going to actually invest a lot of time monitoring these agents and the conversations they're having with consumers today. You're going to want to make sure that people aren't frustrated. You're going to want to make sure that the way that you sort of verbalize something, or the way that you've structured your intents, is the way that customers are going, if you will, through those particular flows. This is an example out of the LiveVox platform in terms of how we provide the capability for folks to monitor virtual agents. Of course, lots of other companies in the space have other capabilities, but having the ability to, in real time, tap into a conversation will prove immensely valuable to your organization in improving this. And I think this is what you want to do, whenever you set out any technology project, is to test how is it actually performing in the field. Move on to the next slide. What you're also going to want to do is you're going to see, and you are going to want to improve on your intent. So Nick, you brought up an excellent point a little bit around NLP. And what's interesting is, of course, we can understand things around the edges. Yes, yeah, okay, that's fine. All of those things are already largely pre-baked in a lot of models. But what's interesting, when we talk to a lot of organizations, their assumptions regarding the way that customers communicate problems, or the way that they call certain things in certain businesses, may not be what you currently have as your own taxonomy. And one of the best ways to check that taxonomy is to constantly be iterating regarding your flows and being able to visualize them, to say, hey, look, people are kind of going down this path, and we have some really good answers for them, which is excellent. Or folks are kind of going down this path, and maybe it's not an ideal path. Maybe we're intending for them to do something else. And so having a visual map where customer intents and conversations are balanced against each other, and utilizing tools like historical data sets, or in this example, a speech analytics tool, gives you that sort of great insight. So that way you can take this back to management and say, hey, look, we need to do something different. We thought people would self-service or would not self-service, and we're getting a lot of either demand or we're getting a lot of friction in this particular point. So this is a little bit of a best practice around how you can do this.
So as speech analytics becomes more and more commonplace in contact centers, and as people, try to find a return on investment in doing so, this is another way where speech analytics pays off, is what you're saying. This helps inform the bot and helps you get better and better at it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this has been really sort of a great tool, because whenever we have a lot of conversations initially with clients, they kind of, I'll call it, visualize the bot as this black box, right? Something goes in, the bot kind of churns through that, gets not very frequently tested, and out comes some results. I think that's maybe the IVR way of looking at things, if you will. We see a lot of forward-thinking organizations having moved a little bit past that and saying, okay, it's not enough that I just did this. I actually need to manage this on a fairly frequent basis and make sure that I'm making tweaks and iterations, and I have all the right tools to make tweaks or iterations. Otherwise, quickly the value of this is going to decline over a period of time. Move forward. This kind of breaks things down a little bit further. So that way you have the right data set, you understand all of your intents, you also understand the frequency of all of these intents that are happening. I'll give you kind of a little bit of a data point. When we've deployed this in a number of clients, we usually will start sort of with a set number of flows. And what's pretty interesting about this is the initial assumptions around what customers will want to do versus what they actually end up doing. And I think this is very interesting because this is sort of the data set that you should be managing within your organization. It's not enough just to make assumptions and not really sort of validate them going after. So pretty important piece here. Okay, move forward one. Okay, so a little bit of how can we make this very digestible and very simple for clients? Today, as you're thinking about deploying this technology, first of all, we call this the greatest hits. I didn't coin that term within the LiveVox organization, although I also would love to take credit for that. But identify your greatest hits, the 5 things that you think your customers are going to do, and you have a high probability of executing. This is also what I think a lot about, and I give clients all the recommendations to do this, is start simple. This doesn't have to be the world's most amazing bot. You don't have to compete with Amazon or the lovely airline that you fly that does everything. There are a lot of use cases that can be automated in a number of ways that can provide value. Whether it is executing an actual function like a password reset, or if it's collecting information on every call, pre the time that you pass it off to an agent, or even authenticating a customer pre the time that you pass it over to an agent, or simply understanding the customer's intent so you can route them more appropriately. Think small and execute very well on this. This will help you sort of to build upon moving forward. Then in addition to that, of course, make sure that you have the right data set and position this within your organization as an iterative kind of a project. In other words, don't just say we're going to build this once and we're going to let it go. Think of it more from the standpoint, we're going to build this, and just like we train our people today, we're going to train this and optimize this going forward. This is sort of one of the bigger mistakes we see. People think of it as sort of a set it and forget it, and that's clearly not the case with these tools.
So great recap. So Boris, for folks who are on the call today who are more toward the beginning of their AI journey, what's the one key takeaway? What's, if you got nothing else out of the last 45 minutes, what's the one thing?
Well, I mean, Nick, I don't know if I can have two, but I will
you
try to.
You can have two, Boris.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. No, I think there's the way that I think about it. I think first of all, don't be afraid to pilot this and to try this. There's always should be room for innovation within your organization. because I think the benefit is tremendous. It's tremendously there. I think the second piece of this, as you're thinking about getting started, get started with a solid unified data set. It will make your journey much easier. So identify that sort of some level of source of truth for your data. It will make the deployment much simpler for your organization.
Great, thanks. So, Michael, we talked a lot about a lot today. So, from your analyst perspective, can you bring it all home for us in kind of one big set of recommendations?
Well, sure. I'd be happy to share not only some recommendations, but perhaps a few predictions that I think, Nick, will have a big impact on overall customer service and customer experience. And so if I start on the left with anticipating future customer and consumer needs, this relates to me to consumer behavior due to the pandemic. And this one's really hard to predict as we look at a shift in consumer behavior. I think a lot of it will depend on government responses, not only from an economic stimulus perspective, if we consider shutdowns, and whether or not there's a sizable uptick in vaccination and fewer hospitalizations. This all ties into our overall economic recovery. I'll just close on this to say that there's a tremendous amount of maybe fear, uncertainty, polarization, and maybe confusion. If you layer on some social justice protests and consumer shortages, topically, just like we're seeing with the oil refinery hack and disruption in delivery, this could really be harmful to the economy and the American standard of living. But if we move to recruiting agents and retaining the right talent, that's blocking and tackling. That's the fundamentals, And I want to talk about maybe later in the broadcast about companies that are doing particular things that have hundreds of thousands of agents that they have to recruit and retain and make sure that they're trained correctly. Looking at supporting evolving, nature of work with new business models. Well, here are a couple of examples. If you look at the flexible work models today, crowdsourcing, the gig economy, temporary and contract work, these are going to emerge and, to me, coexist with full-time work opportunities. If we expand that into the area of unified collaboration and communication software, this is going to be integrated with business software, and all of that will be used to streamline business processes. This is one that's not talked about a lot, but there's a global demand for advanced cybersecurity, and there's a shortage of skilled cyber workforce individuals. And I think this is going to create some new security business models that will include threat sharing for the evolving connected workspace. If we look at the advancement and adoption of innovative technologies, one of the things that we predict is that in a few years that the global cloud computing market will advance to $390 billion with an annual growth rate of 17%. As companies move toward open source cloud services that increasingly support in-house remote workforces post-COVID, whenever that might be. And you're going to see a lot of augmented and virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and robotics platforms that I think will play a key role in the evolution of the workforce. And with that, you're going to see some brand new job opportunities along the way. I think there are going to be automation trends, cognitive computing, and the rise of professional service robots that will also transform the future of workplace technology. As we look at accelerating workforce transformation, this shift in workforce, dominated by maybe Gen Z, will comprise, we predict, 75% of the global workforce in 2030. And this Gen Z will need to adapt to the rapidly shifting skills environment in a very fast-changing job market. So that's going to be a combination of technical and human skills. Now, finally, the future workplaces have to seek ways to balance the flexibility offered by contractual work and the lack of benefit and protections that we had in the past for contractual work by increasing minimum wages and living wage thresholds. So that's pretty much all I had then on that note.
Okay, great. Good, really good stuff. And thanks for that wrap up on that. So we have some time for Q&A. And a question just came in that was really good. Boris, I'll direct this to you.
Yep.
What kind of resources does an organization need to help continue to improve their IVA and be focused on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. We kind of think about it as in two ways. I think one, you must have somebody that perhaps is sort of I'll call it a combination of analyst / customer experience champion, and maybe he has some third hat, which is maybe they've worked in a quality management team before. And the reason I say they must have those three hats is because they must be sort of looking at it from a lens of, is this the experience that we were looking to drive with the virtual agent specifically? Two, are there some sort of rounding of the corners that we can do, and they're tapping into their prior experience? And three, analytically, is this a one-off? Is this sort of a particular pattern that we're seeing? Are there sort of other tangential things that we can round off in a particular request? In other words, should we improve something that we have? Should we create a new category? How often this is happening? I think those are sort of like a trifecta of skills that we're seeking of a person who can actually sort of improve, if you will, a virtual agent deployment at a client site.
Great, good stuff. So, Michael, I'm going to direct this to you. You mentioned something a couple of times, and certainly agent attrition has been something the industry has been trying to deal with, and it's becoming perhaps even more interesting or challenging in the new times that we're in. What do folks do to help keep agents from leaving?
That's a really great question. I get that very often. With my lens sometimes on the outsourcing industry, one of the things you do is you utilize corporate social responsibility, Nick. That slice that moves to that fanatical focus on people, on their development and their future vocation. And so you want to be known as the employer of choice. And the question is, well, how do you do that? For companies that are successful at it, you're doing a lot of different things. One, you're making sure that there's easy access to public transportation. And in some cases, you even provide transportation for your employees for night shifts. I see really creative things like meal subsidies, cafes, canteen facilities within the company. Agents have easy access, and I see this in foreign countries a lot. In this case, in Honduras, where you have banking, groceries, post office, all located within walking distance of, let's say, a contact center. In a country like Guyana, where you've got really serious healthcare issues, particularly for children, there's milk subsidies, right? That's pretty creative, and access to medical staff. You've even got, in some countries, interfaith chapels. I mentioned on-site childcare. And then finally, I think that impact sourcing, where you're consciously and intentionally hiring and providing career development opportunities to folks that would otherwise have limited prospects, can be a real game changer in bringing in the right people, training them, and then keeping that talent.
Great, good stuff. Thanks. So, Boris, a couple of questions just back to IVAs a little bit. So we talked a lot about all the things you should think about to get started and do things right. What are some of the mistakes you've seen made that maybe folks, it would help them to avoid?
Yeah, absolutely. Couple that sort of come to mind is one, assuming that your business problem is, I guess, like I'll call it the customer's business problem. So I think one, what I would advise a lot of people is really to take a customer lens on this thing versus not. The second one is your desire to automate something versus your technological capability to actually execute on this. Look, if there's no service, if there's no API to call on your side in order to automate a password reset, like this thing isn't, I'll call it, isn't happening or isn't happening in an automated fashion for you. So I would start to evaluate your own capabilities. And then third, it kind of goes back to the point that we talked about, which is centralization of data. And I think once we get into a conversation with lots of clients, the comments are, well, that data piece is there, well, and that data piece is there, and data piece is there. So I would discourage people from saying, hey, look, let's connect this thing to 5 or 6 or 8 different systems. Then it becomes, a fairly large technical data movement and service bus, however you want to call it, project. And this is what's going to stall your implementation. I would advise to centralize data and to execute some of these things in a much simpler, much more intuitive format. So in other words, get high volume, high velocity before you tackle some of the much harder technological challenges about gluing the system to everything within your enterprise.
Great. Then one last question that I see here that came in. What's more helpful to agent efficiency? An agent-assisted bot that uses NLP to understand a conversation and make recommendations to the agent, or having a unified view of data from all siloed systems? And no, D, all of the above was not an answer.
I mean, I could make an attempt. I think that's a A or B kind of a point.
Apples and oranges a little.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, to be quite honest with you. But I think optimizing and having all of the right data is probably more important than having recommendations. I think that gets you a lot of the way there. But I'm not going to say that I have the right answer. There's so many different organizations for who challenges are very different. What I would encourage somebody that's out there listening right now is I would encourage a test. And there's multiple ways to execute that.
Good stuff. Okay, hey guys, I always like to make sure we give a few minutes back to folks before their next meeting. So great discussion today. Before we go, I do want to point out that we have some terrific resources that are relative to today's conversation that we'll be sending to each of you. So Michael, Boris, I want to thank you both again for joining today and having an entertaining and lively discussion. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Thanks very much and have a terrific day.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you.
Take care.